It's funny because disruption is such a cliche. We've heard it over the years, over and over and over, but God damn it, it's happening.
Advice I give to startups is if you're going to integrate and you can't integrate with everyone, you don't have the resources at the time, like who is most likely to acquire you?
With House of HR, one of the things that they don't do is they acquire companies, but they don't absorb them into the mothership. They allow them to run themselves.
We're in this weird infinite loop of robots interviewing robots, and then at what point do humans come into play? And that whole relationship and dynamic is a little crazy right now.
Chad, Cheese, welcome to the show. It feels like you have to introduce you as Chad and Cheese.
What's up?
Gents, always together, dynamic duo.
We're not always together.
Come on.
Always.
Come on. Chad and I do not live together.
I've never seen you above.
Beds.
I've never seen you above.
People think we live together. We have room for activities with bunk beds. Not how it works.
But yeah, for those that don't know you both, it'd be great to get an intro of who you are together and then who you are apart. So yeah,
I don't know. I'll go for it. So Chad and I have known each other for 20 years almost, and we've done this show for 7 years. I don't think either of us had any idea that it would become what it has become, but we're both, I think, pretty happy that it has become that. We are commentators on the news within HR tech, recruitment, macroeconomic stories. Obviously, inclusion, diversity has been big since we've done the show, and things we haven't expected. But yeah, it's sort of the news with a sports talk show radio kind of vibe. We're not afraid to cuss. We're not afraid to give our opinion. We are not bought and sold by any company, so we're free to give our opinions. And I think the listeners enjoy that.
Yeah, they certainly do. Chad, over to you. Right. Personal intro. What were you doing before? What are you doing now?
Yeah, so the normal thing, if you've heard me give it before, you're going to hear it again. I was actually in radio, and then I got into this industry before Monster was Monster. So in late 1998, we launched Monster in early 1999, then all to all the fanfare, blimps and Super Bowls and Super Bowl commercials and all that other shit. I left there after a few years to go to Direct Employers Association, was there for 10 years as a VP and working directly with major Fortune 500 companies around a litany of things, which gave me some amazing experience with technology and definitely with the daily problems that companies would have in the talent acquisition process, not just with technology, but, with hiring managers, et cetera, and U.S. government, what have you. Left there, became chief experience officer with Recruit Military, was there for a very short time through acquisition and transition, built Randstad's veteran hiring program there, worked for companies like the Ford Motor Company, the RPO version of Randstad. Left there, wanted to finally get my consultancy business back up and running like I had for a short time before. We started the podcast because Joel, as a serial entrepreneur, was doing that. So we needed kind of like a brand, exercise to really get our voices out there. And that's where Chad and Cheese pretty much stole the show.
Yeah. Awesome. Great rundown. And I think, today, really, I want to take advantage of the fact of your bird's eye viewpoints across both of you on the landscape and the market and how in touch and in tune you are with things. And like one of the biggest themes right now, and everybody's talking about it, is generative AI. And I think here's one of my things. I used to spend a lot of time looking at technology myself in a previous life in the rec tech space. And even before generative AI, people would just put, instead of their company name, it would be company name .ai instead of .com. And all of a sudden, there was this mind-blowingly good solution that we're going to change everything, and then actually very little had changed. There was still lots of humans in the loop, and there was maybe a cheeky little algorithm that had been added, but that was about it. And I think now we're at this phase where there's good stuff going on, there's some stuff which probably has some of those old trappings, and then there's some kind of major shifts, and maybe we split this into the good, the bad, the ugly. So let's start positive. Give me some good things that you're seeing, good things with the advent of this change of technology, maybe some good providers out there.
Yeah, well, Euro Chad's going to take over because I'm really in a good mood being here in the Algarve, all the sun and beach and whatnot. It's funny because disruption is such a cliche. We've heard it over the years, over and over and over, but God damn it, it's happening. Generative AI itself, watching what, we actually have the processing capabilities to take the huge amount of data that we have and do something with it, which we couldn't do before. So it's incredibly exciting and very heartening to see a lot of these new startups, these point solutions, which are going to be the seeds to something much, much bigger, but they're also going to be the eightfolds of tomorrow as well. Ones who, are pretty much vaporware in many cases. So it's interesting to watch, and it's going to be so fun as you see many more. I'm going to predict that many more startups flood the zone because this technology is going to be so easy for them to get their hands on, especially from a domains standpoint, not from general, because that's going to be way too expensive for most of these kids and their toys.
I'll go. And by the way, I'm amused that we just skipped over my personal story, but I don't get to name drop Monster and Ronstock like Chad does. So
I mean, that is my faux pas.
So I'll just
feel free to jump in with it.
I'll just jump right into my opinion.
It's a personal story here.
Just forget that I'm even here. So, Chad is right. Look, when Chad and I got into this, there were maybe a dozen companies that were interesting and worth talking about. I'd say up until 10 years ago, that was maybe 50 to 100. Now it's potentially thousands, if not many hundreds, that we talk about. I mean, tremendous trends. No one saw the pandemic coming. No one saw the work from home thing coming. No one could have seen, the likes of Deal, Remote, Oyster, and those, 5 years ago. And that's a reality now. No one could have seen what conversational AI would mean to recruiting and the automation of recruiting and pre-screening and scheduling. Like, those are immensely interesting developments in what we're talking about. And then we go through a period of high inflation, high interest rates, companies, the year of efficiency. Let's lay off a ton of tech people. Let's reduce our headcount significantly. And what we're seeing is when you lay off a bunch of tech people, a lot of startups happen because of that. And when we talk to investors out there, they're not looking to invest $50 to $100 million. They're looking to invest $2 to $5 million in many of these really seed round companies that are doing really exciting and interesting things. So from our perspective as a podcast, it becomes really interesting because although there are more stories and keeping track of it is more challenging, the stories are more interesting and the companies are more kind of exciting, and the disruption that's happening with the big companies. Look, ATSs, 10 years ago, they should all have been public by now, with being the envy of all of Wall Street. That didn't happen. So the ATS business has been turned upside down because of disruption and people becoming platforms. So the good is, if you're in our space as podcasters, is there's never a shortage of things to talk about and things that are exciting that people want to learn, because there's so much clutter and so much noise out there. How do you make sense of it all? That's kind of our job. And Chad and I living this every day, it's hard. It's hard to keep up with everything that's going on. And I would venture to say we can't do it. We can't even do it, let alone the consumers and the marketplace out there. So it's just an exciting time. I can remember when we started the show, it was going to be a weekly show. And we had talked about is there going to be enough stuff to talk about on a weekly basis? I mean, my God, this is employment. I mean, we have more than enough stuff to talk about every week, and we could have a 3-hour show if we wanted to do it with all the news stories that are out there.
And I think, it's literally as easy now as talking into a machine, right? In order to produce your idea and turn it into something tangible. It's not just in our space, right? This is across all spaces. And then when you think about the software dev time, right? Existing providers are able to roll out features and roadmaps that, were long in the distance. It was only until your major customer really pushed you, that you'd really turn up the dial and make it happen. Outside of that, people are saying, hey, I need this quick change. Well, let's make the quick change. You're seeing a competitor that's popped up with a point solution. You think, well, we need to add that to our repertoire. And then, like you're saying, you've got all these point solutions that are just able to just say, right, we've got an idea, we've got experience. I've always wanted to start a software business. I've always wanted to, kind of set up shop and, enabled to do so. I think the kind of point which you've knocked on there is, how do you stand out?
I mean, I was commenting on the show.
Go, Joe.
The recipe used to be raise $50 to $100 million. Let's be an 8 to 10 year company, and then either go public or get bought by, a big, massive company. And that equation seems to be now let's launch a cool feature 3 to 5 years, let's raise $5-10 million, and then let's flip this thing into an ATS or a platform that can do that. So the math around what a startup is and the lifespan of that startup. I know we mentioned talking about Scotland before the show, and we were talking about, I won't mention any names, but he was talking about that same thing. Like, look, I create these companies now to be 2, 3, 5-year companies, but I want to flip these things as quick as possible. I think that's partly because the technology is moving so fast. It's hard to have a company that starts and lasts for 10 plus years.
Mm-hmm. And then the shelf life of tech, shelf life of skills doesn't last that long as well, right? I think that's part of it. It's that kind of generational piece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Moore's law sped all of that up in the first place, and now it's going faster. So yeah, I mean, just the skills, not just in this space, but every company is a tech company now, right? Walmart is a huge tech company. Walmart. I mean, it's just it's crazy. So yeah, it's the convergence of tech into our everyday lives.
And what about turning the page a little bit here? Like, a lot of this stuff is built off having great volumes of data to work with to build really effective models. And there's a bunch of companies out there, the Baker's dozen RPOs, who have got more data on recruiting than you can bear to think about. And they've often had these kind of innovation hubs where they're building tools and platforms, and some of them are more tech enabled than others. Often tools are bought in. Where do you see their play in this? Where do you see their opportunity? Are you seeing anything good coming out of the major staffings?
Yeah, I think thus far we've seen they failed dramatically, other than Recruit Holdings. Monster was bought by Randstad. It's dead. You take a look at Adecco bought Hired.com. I mean, where's that at? And then you've got AMS, who created Hourly. And I mean, where's that gone? It's pretty much in the dirt too. So I think one of the biggest issues that staffing has, RPO has, is the same issue that Monster had back in the day. They were hooked into the heroin drip of just job posting revenue, and they didn't think of what could kill us next, and then run parallel business models so that they could transition later. One thing that I have seen though is House of HR. It's like their entire culture is predicated on this out of Belgium and many nations in Europe. Their whole culture is predicated on, let's kill what we're doing today. Let's make it better today. But most other staffing companies, most other RPOs, they don't have that built in their culture. So they're going to have huge problems. Yeah.
And I know Chad and I may disagree on this, but I think the I think the jury's still out on whether Recruit knows what to do with Indeed. Since it bought it and where Indeed's going and the spaghetti that Indeed is thrown at the wall, I don't think it's a slam dunk that Recruit has done a great job with Indeed and or Glassdoor. There seems to be a real problem with recruiting staffing companies buying these tech plays and trying to get it right.
But you'd fancy that they've got enough data, right? And enough revenue to build something themselves, right? That augments their internal process. Yeah,
they have to put money on it. I mean, literally, they have to run a parallel business. They can't do it within their own business, and that's what AMS originally was looking to do with Hourly. Is they were looking to break it out as their own company, and I think it would have had a chance then. Unfortunately, it was pretty much killed in the crib because it was smothered to death by the staffing company. So, I mean, you really have to break it out and allow it to run itself.
They look at it too much as like a vehicle to advance our business, to advance more recs and placements, and not as a separate entity in and of itself. And that's typically where they stumble and screw it up.
Yeah. And like I said, with House of HR, one of the things that they don't do is they acquire companies, but they don't absorb them into the mothership. They allow them to run themselves, and that's a part of their culture. Well, they were able to create Now Jobs, which literally has become a company on its own because they said, what could kill our main business today? They created Now Jobs, and it still hasn't killed their standardized business, but it did create another piece of the business that they're generating tons of revenue off of.
And it feels like, one of the big areas for potential acquisition for SaaS businesses has traditionally been RPOs and staffing companies, right? And we're talking about this setup, right, where you've got a much higher volume of startups, a much higher volume of point solutions that are all going to be looking for an outcome with a shorter life cycle. But essentially, I suppose the market's moved to smaller bets and, higher odds on the outcome, right? Feels that way.
Managing risk as well.
I think, yeah, for sure. I think the kind of next part, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on is like, what can companies do wrong, right? So we talked about some of these companies, they're starting, they're solving a small problem, they're expanding out, becoming a platform from there, competing in this kind of, rat race of SaaS platforms that, invariably are going to be launched. What about some of the incumbents? Where could they go wrong? Some of the new up and coming, where could they go wrong in positioning, framing, etc.?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked to a company earlier today. We were doing a firing squad, and they went too big too fast. Then they had to retract very quickly because they didn't have the capital to be able to support their vision. That's the biggest key, is you have to understand, what you can actually afford, right? In your vision. Do you want a Maserati? Yeah, you do. Can you afford it? Probably not. You probably can't put gas in the damn thing. So many companies who want to be platforms might really just want to focus very, very targeted on being a great feature, right? And being the best feature in that space so that they have possibly a better, quicker exit, right? Instead of going back to the funders, getting more money, having to, at that point, promise to be a platform, right? And then trying to achieve that, which is not easy, right? And I get why companies do it. They want to be able to add tech to their stack because they become more valuable that way. Valuation goes through the roof when you start adding those things, but that's not always the smart play. And when we're talking about how fast technology is moving today, if you started 4, 5, 6 years ago, that might not be the play.
I think there's a coolness problem. We're building too many things because they're cool and not because they relieve pain. And there are too many solutions that add time to people's day. The most successful companies are ones that are time machines, if you will, that give back time. It's as opposed to require your time to figure it out, to babysit it, to manage it. So there's too much hey, we're cool. We got AI on our expo, booth. We've got, we're just cool. You should buy it. But what pain are you relieving? And the other thing that tends to be a real challenge for companies, really solve a problem. Don't add problems for me. Relieve my pain.
And it's like the inverse for buyers is a great point, on that, articulating the pain and the problem. And the inverse for buyers, if you're a head of HR or a senior resourcing leader, talent acquisition leader, really ask yourself the question: am I solving a problem here? I think it's often the challenge. I think part of it though, you buy the sexy, flashy thing that does the awesome demo, makes your brand look great. It's great for your personal brand, great for your org brand, great for TA brand, but not necessarily the org at the end of it. And that kind of point of the time machine, I think, super, super valuable, because a lot of the time, we spend ages, as TA professionals integrating and implementing new tools, even if they're pretty seamless, right? To optimize that change management internally, absorbs a lot of time. I think another bit I'd love to
requires another tab being open. You're dead on arrival.
That segue is wonderful, because I was going to say, what about managing things from within the ATSs, right? You saw the big ATSs, the big HSIM, moving to this marketplace model. You can get everything you need, a one-stop shop. I've got some thoughts of where I see the tech potentially impacting that, but what do you see with that marketplace model? Because that was heralded as this new generation. Do you still think we're on that path?
I'll let Joe go with this one. He's a lover of marketplaces.
I love the marketplace. I mean, look, it certainly makes sense. We're all aware of our phone app stores or marketplaces, and it makes sense to have all those tools in one place. I think that the challenge that startups have is, at what point does the ATS buy my competitor and I become irrelevant in this marketplace? So we saw it with iCIMS and Text Recruit. We saw it with JobVite and Canvas. We see, is it Greystone? Gray something. The text Greenhouse just partnered with the text recruiting. It's Gray something. I'm forgetting.
Grayscale.
What is it?
Grayscale.
Grayscale. My bad. Greystoke was the Legend of Tarzan back in the 80s. not a good movie, but just, that's where my mind was going. So as a startup,
he only remembers that there were boobies in that movie. That's the only thing he remembers.
I think there were baboon boobies, which you can't beat on any 80s flick. So the challenge is, it's like catch-22, right? Like, I got to be on the marketplace, but at what point does my competitor get bought, and my time and energy to be on this marketplace is irrelevant now because this is the solution that they've picked. So it's kind of a catch-22 in terms of the marketplace, but it's what customers want. Customers want all their favorite tools in one dashboard to be able to use. And if you're a startup and not in that ecosystem, like, it's really, really challenging. And advice I give every startup that I talk to is, like, job one should be build the product. Job two should be integrate it into as many places as possible.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're going to see, and it was funny, we were actually on site at a innovation day, and we were talking through, just the different models and whatnot. And I think that because, again, not just the velocity of tech, but the amount of startups that are going to be coming, have been coming, and going to be coming to the market, it's going to be almost impossible to manage a marketplace. You're going to have, and I'm talking about the marketplaces like for the Workdays and the SAPs and so on and so forth. I think it's going to be almost impossible for them to manage it. They're going to have to put a whole team on trying to manage that, and then suss out everything that's dead like every other day and whatnot. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think we've seen, like, the Workdays of the world, they are starting to get, like, quote unquote, like, certified partners in a marketplace, and those are the ones that they really take care of, right? The rest of them, they're just listed. They might be there, they might be dead, who knows, right? But at the end of the day, they're looking at those certified players. And as Joel said, you want to try to escalate yourself up to that station of certified in whatever marketplace you're in. But I think some of those platforms, they'll get rid of them because it'll be way too unwieldy and hard to manage.
And I think, in the context of, particularly if you're looking to sell into enterprise organizations, right, they're going to be essentially down to three choices every single time when it comes to your major HSIMs provider. And if you're not on that list, you're at a risk potentially there. And that kind of certified play is absolutely what those three big businesses all rest their kind of main commercial revenue on, right? Is their ability to, have people particular, like, skill sets, and then the same to move through into the marketplace. I think it's a great shout. I think the other bit as well, from kind of my perspective, is as that marketplace model was first starting, it's like, cool, we're going to bring all the referral tools in. And then you see those ATSs and CRM start to build their own referral tools, right?
Yeah, because it became a feature.
Do we need those on that? Yeah.
It became a feature, right? Yeah.
And some of the more complex things that maybe aren't, as much of a point solution, that now is much easier to turn that into a feature, right? So again, you've got that kind of threat from your competitors. You've got the threat of the acquisition of your competitors, and I think you've got the threat of the system themselves. So you've got to be really good at what you do again.
Yeah. And that said,
yes, you do.
Advice I give,
why focus matters.
Yeah. Advice I give to startups is, if you're going to integrate, and you can't integrate with everyone, you don't have the resources at the time, like, who is most likely to acquire you? And maybe that's your 1, 2, 3. Because if someone's already bought a competitor, or someone's, like, really in bed with a competitor, like, who can you get into and build a bridge and a strong relationship with, in hopes that platform will buy you at some point? Because most of them need the services that you have, and the acquisition part is just a matter of time and who they're going to acquire.
Well, and a lot of that sometimes comes down to one person in the organization. And I remember in advising ISIMs, well, not ISIMs, but with candidate ID, and saying, look, I've got some contacts over at ISIMs, and here's the play. Their CEO came from Marketo.
Yeah.
He understands marketing. He knows market automation. You do market automation in recruiting. That is his jam.
Yep.
He will be excited to be able to hear something like that. And, at the end of the day, Adam and Scott and the team, they did a hell of a job, and ISIMs acquired candidate ID. So there is some reading of the tea leaves that are there, but I'm not boasting myself or Joel or anything like that. But if you're in this space and you don't have somebody who is steeped in with experience in this space and contacts in this space, do it now. Do it now.
Joe, you were going to come in there before. I thought.
I don't think I was.
It kind of paused.
I was
It froze
probably
for
just
me a
having a
second.
deep thought and looked like I needed to say something.
Were you going back to the baboon boobies?
I'm
Still on
a
the
very
still on the mind.
cerebral,
A little quiet
very
moment.
cerebral person.
Now, that's his gas face. He has gas.
Yeah, the Canon ID iSIM Marketo connection was a rare one. That's a real.
Oh yeah. Well, it is, but they're there. You know what I mean? It's who's in the organization, who has, you have good relationships with. I mean, this is still a relationship business, right? It could be the VP of strategic, alliances. It could be somebody else who could actually get you into those people. So use your connections, use your advisors' connections.
For sure. And what about we've done a bit of good, bit of bad. Not that we had to do good, bad, ugly, but what's not working out there? What's really blown up and you guys don't agree with? Tell me.
Don't agree. I think you're seeing the unicorns that were created or born from, let's call it 21 to 23, 22. I mean, that story is coming to a head. And if you're the emperor that was not wearing clothes, or as Warren Buffett would say it, when the tide goes out, we know who's wearing swim trunks and who isn't. I think we're finding out who got a lot of money in that time period that aren't wearing swim trunks, if you will. And those are either going to be fire sales on the TJ Maxx clearance rack. They're just going to go away, or that's basically it. They're going to go away. They're going to be zombie businesses. They won't get any more money. Mm-hmm. They'll just kind of stumble along and hopefully get acquired at some point at a discount. But to me, that is the ugliness of a lot of money went into this space when the pandemic happened, and people were just like throwing money at dumb ideas. And those dumb ideas are coming to roost.
Yeah, and Joel says it a lot. Usually you don't see startups die because they took too little money. It's because they took too much. Right now, it might take a lot longer for them to burn out, for God's sakes, but they just took too much money and their TAM had to just explode, and that's a problem. But I mean, my ugly is literally it's the ugly for the staffing companies, staffing and RPO companies who poured billions over the years, poured billions of dollars, recruitment marketing dollars into Indeed, only to have them turn around and become a staffing company themselves. You had to see this coming. Recruit Holdings is their parent company. They are the biggest, I think in Asia Pac, I think they're the biggest staffing organization. And how did you think they were going to try to penetrate the US, right? They needed a Trojan horse. Oh, wait a minute. They have Indeed. Indeed is the master of Trojan horses. Yeah. So I think
this movie before.
In this case, yes, we've seen this movie before, right? Joel and I have been talking about this forever. What are they doing over here? What are they doing over there? I mean, they literally just pulled out of their interviewing platform here as of late. But you have to ask yourself, was that just all smoke and mirrors why they got this big $327 billion nut ready, which is the total addressable market for staffing, right? And versus the $32 billion they were operating in before, right? Yeah. So they're looking to 10x. And I'm going to go back to the staffing companies. You guys paid for this. You were suckers. You got nailed. You had these candidates in your database for years. You didn't leverage the database. You didn't leverage what the assets you had in place. And guess what? Probably not all of you, because they've got a shit ton of cash, but there are going to be a lot of staffing companies out there who poured money into Indeed who are going to get their heads chopped off in the next 5 years.
This is where you play the media file that's like, you are so dumb. You are so dumb for real.
I think
it's a classy show.
To an extent, though, I just don't have all of that stuff yet. I'm early in my journey. I think before we started, Chad said weird about 15 times. I'd love to get that as the soundbite. Yeah. That's the one. That's the one to hit again. But I think actually think about Trojan horse that happened before that, right? Indeed had it happen to them to a certain extent. They paid for all of that ad revenue with Google, and then Google drops Google for Jobs, right? It was a similar kind of setup, one of their biggest customers, and they came and played in their field.
But Indeed's play was mostly
Google didn't follow through.
No, they didn't.
They did follow through.
But how many job boards were just, fist, you know what? I don't know what kind of show you got here. I don't want to cuss because it is maybe a family show. But we've seen this movie before. What Indeed did to job boards, they're going to do to staffing companies.
It's game on. It's game on. Yeah, and do you think they'll do it? Do you think they'll follow through? Like Google didn't follow through. Do you think they'll follow through?
No, I think they will. I think they have to. There's no way from an investor standpoint. I don't see them going after the entire $327 billion nut, right? But a big chunk of that is temp. And they have Indeed Flex, right? They bought Sift out of the UK 2019. So this is a platform. And Joel and I talked about it when they bought them. Staffing needs to have an operating system, especially temp staffing, right? So that if I have a job, right, and it's a temp job, I can actually look for other opportunities that I can slide in and out of, right? And it just makes it, that's how I want to do what I do. And many Americans, I don't know about the rest of the world, but I know many Americans actually live that way because they have 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. So this is a very important opportunity for them to almost have like the Uber of staffing, to be able to literally just get into those shift gigs. And next thing you know, you're off and running. So let's see if they can pull it off. I have to agree with Joel. I'm not sure that Recruit can make it happen, because this is going to be a very, very big lift. They're going to have to spend a lot of money, but we'll see. And again, if staffing companies continue to spend money on Indeed, they're just going to take that money and use it as ammo back at the staffing companies.
All junkies, man. They're all on the heroin drip.
They are. They need rehab.
I wonder if I should have a disclaimer here. I feel like, you guys are on such a bash across this and across the world. RPO staffing companies watching right now, anybody from them, go in and circulate that message internally.
I love them. I love them, but it's just like, good God, get those fucking blinders off, for God's sakes.
Mm-hmm. What about the other big player that this is undoubtedly going to be broadcast on? We got the biggest fish in the room, owned by one of the largest companies on earth, that really spearheaded, I suppose, Gen AI being in vogue with the backing of OpenAI and everything else connected to it. They've got the biggest addressable audience in almost every single market when it comes to white collar work. What's the kind of thoughts on LinkedIn?
we had a wonderful conversation about this earlier. Joel and I did. If you look at it, this is probably approaching an antitrust case, because you have Microsoft, who owns LinkedIn, who nobody wants to say they own OpenAI, but they own OpenAI, the amount of money that they've actually, so they control OpenAI. Now they're cutting off data. At least this is what we're hearing from many of the vendors that actually utilize and they work with LinkedIn, cutting off data. So what are they doing? They're using that pool of data, our data, by the way, to train their models, and then not giving access to other large language models, right? So they have a market differentiator, which could prospectively be one that nobody has access to.
According to Elon, he's creating a LinkedIn killer, so we don't have to worry about antitrust issues with LinkedIn.
Have you seen Jobs on Twitter? Oh yeah, that's going to do it. That's going to do it.
Remember, LinkedIn is so crazy for Elon. No, look, to their credit, man. I mean, LinkedIn, shit. If you can squash the competition, if you can play whack-a-mole with the spiders and keep on the move, delete as many fake profiles as you can, like, you are really powerful, and their revenue numbers speak to that. Whether they come under legal or governmental strong arms, I don't know. Again, Microsoft has played this movie before with the government, and there's still Microsoft. In fact, they're stronger than ever. So yeah, I mean, we talked about Indeed. Indeed is trying to be more profile centric, which I think partly they need to be if they want to be in staffing, but also if they want to compete against LinkedIn, they need to be more of a profile. And like now they're adding, you can have 5 profiles. I'm not sure that's healthy for the marketplace, but it is a strategy that they're taking on. And Chad hates, and justifiably so, job search sucks on LinkedIn. Their engine of like related jobs is awful. I get emails every day because I'm a co-host on a podcast that I could be a host at a restaurant. that's really bad matching. There's no other way around it. So, but also when you're a monopoly or behave like one, you can be kind of lazy on innovation. And LinkedIn has shown that they're pretty lazy on innovation. And as long as employers keep paying the fees and the 10% increase every year, like, why would they innovate?
Although I think our challenge, right? Although, there's definitely functionality improvements that you'd want. You'd always want that with the big incumbent. Like, they are still, for many people, their number one source of talent, particularly for head office staff, right, is inescapable. The reach that they've got and the depth that they've got. And I think, that kind of data fortress play, you're going to see that across all the big tech players who have got these monumental kind of collections of data to play their own models. And indeed, moving to that kind of marketplace dynamic to a certain extent, it validates our existence as HackerJob, right? The kind of two big incumbents, the two big players, both marketplace models. And I think we're going to see more and more marketplace models because you keep in hold of that data. And it kind of plays back to that RPO staffing agency. These guys, again, they've got tens of millions of data points that should be proprietary to them to power their own models, plus the placements, plus the time to hires for the companies that they're in. They've got that kind of later down the funnel information that those other two just don't have. So I just think it's fascinating. Like, one of them's got to come out and do something pretty meaningful, given what they've got, right? And then that knock-on, the final part of the knock-on is, you were speaking about LinkedIn shutting off access. And you've seen YouTube, right? Their CEO said that the videos aren't going to be used for large language models and training videos, etc. Like, these kind of data fortresses are there. And there's like a whole segment of HR tech that are going to suffer from that. And a lot of them were those unicorn companies that you spoke about in, between 2021 and 23, right? I think the last part, and Joel, we're taking it back a few bits here, but you said about interview tech. I think this is one of the most interesting bits where I see a lot of innovation. I'd love to get your guys' take and steer on that, like, first part of the process. It's in every single process on earth. And until about 5 years ago, there wasn't any tech really focused on it, but now there's a few really good players. So I'd love to get your guys, steer and take on that market.
Well, it's a bit of the Wild West. What typically starts out as just a great idea, like, hey, why don't we have automated scheduling, so we don't have to like literally, we talked to GM, who employed 200 people just for scheduling interviews, right? Like, if you can create efficiencies around that, like, that's just smart business. Unfortunately, we can't have nice things in this country, and job seekers caught on to, like, okay, we can create bots too, and we can create resumes customized to the job to where we'll pass through all of your screening, and that we'll get through and become applicants to the job. Now, what we're starting to see is companies are posting jobs, and then they're getting a ton of qualified candidates, and then they shut the job off. And then once they get into actually looking at these candidates, they don't have the qualifications that they said they did on their automatically generated resume. So now we're in this weird infinite loop of robots interviewing robots. And then at what point do humans come into play? And that whole relationship and dynamic is a little crazy right now. I'm not sure how anyone's going to, like, Chad is part of a startup where they're using blockchain to kind of verify people. Like, that could be a trend that we're seeing, but there's seemingly a spam fest on both, the job seeker side and how employers are trying to make sense of all these resumes that is going to come to a head with new startups and technologies that try to tackle that. But automation, by and large, is fantastic. I think that, my son is a micro case of applying to multiple, like, fast food jobs and hourly jobs here in town. And I can tell you that the restaurants that he responded to that were automated with scheduling and pre-screening questions and, like, the constant contact that he got from that experience are far better than submit your Word resume and hope for the best. So we're trending right into up in terms of benefit, but it's going to be pretty rocky with the Wild West dynamic that we're starting to see with resumes and job seekers and employers trying to speak each other's language.
Yeah, and I think that robot to robot, just to jump in there quickly, like that robot to robot piece, I think part of that was, when I saw the stuff from Indeed about their marketplace model and the way they were communicating and acting, it felt very similar to kind of the way in which we think about things. And then you think about LinkedIn again, like you can't generate that profile multiple times. It's just one profile. And that's like when you're doing that kind of source first approach, at least you've got that relevance and that validation, because this kind of cycle is just going to get worse and worse and more compounded. And like skills verification, key as well. Hence marketplaces, I think, doing well in this setting. Chad, you were going to jump in there, but I had to grab robot to robot. It was too tasty.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, you're good. Joel loves the robot on robot sex videos that are out there. So the big thing here is, and Joel was talking about, how people can fake themselves, right? And fake what they do and their skills and whatnot. So everybody's talking about the skills economy. It's not the skills economy anymore. It's the performance economy. You have to perform to know that individual they have the skill. So we take a look at jobs. First and foremost, jobs are a long list of skills, or not skills, but tasks, right? And within those tasks come skills. We have to, first and foremost, identify the tasks within the jobs. Then we have to prioritize those tasks. At that point, what do? We test for those tasks. We have them actually perform, right? Then we understand what our actual workforce is doing, right? And let's just say from a departmental standpoint, what your department's doing. At that point, now you know what to look for. The problem is nobody's doing that foundational piece to know what the tasks are, to be able to understand the skills, and then testing individuals on what it is, like coding. Right? You do coding tests. How do you know if somebody can code? You see it on their resume. It says Python. They don't even know how to spell it right, for God's sakes. So at that point, it's performance, right? Skills, performance, and then validation. You have to validate. And that's what a lot of those performance pieces come into. So everybody wants to talk about the skills economy. We haven't not even close, build the foundation for many of these skills to really come to the top, unless you're in coding, unless you have like these coding challenges or what have you. I think the startups that focus on that, those are the ones who will actually, they will win if they can get people to understand. And that's the hard part, because this is new for us. We don't break down jobs into tasks. That's what we should be doing. Then we need to understand from that point, what's the most important tasks? How do we look at the skills, et cetera, et cetera. So we still have a lot of highway to drive on this one. We've just started.
And, this is a part of the challenge as well. Like we're drawing it back to that example of wherever the tech goes, it becomes more sophisticated on the other side in which to challenge it. Same way as, cybersecurity, right? And if we move again, candidates are going to move again. And like without the mass, hysteria that was about, people completing interviews with a live feed, etc., I still feel that conversations like this are pretty hard to fake, particularly when you start throwing things out of context, completely erroneous to the conversation, and would throw, bots and people using bots still. Plus, maybe the rise of face-to-face. And part of that other ecosystem I think is really fascinating is like the interview tech, where you're like doing the recordings, you're getting the transcriptions, you're getting the kind of, the prompts for the right sort of questions for those skills underneath it. What do you think of that part of the market? What's your thoughts on like that part of the process, that actual the interview and using tech to help demystify and solve this problem at the front of the funnel?
Well, I mean, first off, all of the interviewing needs to come on the back end piece of it. If you're doing tests up front to be able to see if they actually have the skills, then you can start to, and again, you can use AI or whatever acronym you want to be able to take away a lot of those administrative duties that, that recruiters had. Why should I sit and watch somebody code something, right? After they do it, I can have a conversation with a slate of 10 people so that they actually get a human experience. And then it's better for the recruiter. They're talking to people. They're not just sifting through resumes and hoping that it's not bullshit. And the process actually is relevant to the candidate. That experience is relevant to the candidate. And at the end of the day, it takes them further down the funnel so that they can actually meet a real human.
I think, I think, and on that closing part as well, of that meeting a real human, I spoke to a couple of really good organizations in the past few weeks, and not every org's got the budget to do it. But I love this kind of hiring sprint mentality as well. Build your shortlist and run the entire hiring process over a few days off-site, all face-to-face, all in person, and get a bunch of hires done in one hit for one team or across teams where you've got multiple hiring managers, multiple areas to really get face-to-face. And I think we are going to see a bit more of that as we become increasingly tech-enabled.
It's going to be hard to scale something like that for, like, I think very vital roles. You can do those types of things, but it's going to be hard when when you've got a total rec load of a major Fortune 500 company of 500 or more.
Yeah, you're really going to have to throw in some robot sex to get people interested in that kind of investment in time.
And on that bombshell, if there's any way to close the show, it's robot sex.
That's what we do.
That's what we're here for. Absolute pleasure, gents. A few wonderful sound bites, a plethora of metaphors, and away we go.
Didn't learn anything.
Thank you both.
We had some fun.
Great stuff, folks.